Good afternoon, and thank you for joining our webinar, Access Denied, Digital Access, the right thing, the smart thing, and the required thing to do. We'd like to share a few housekeeping items before we begin. All of your phones are muted for the duration of the call. You can ask a question or post a comment in the chat window. Take a look for the chat window now and feel free to introduce yourself and say where you're from in the chat. Please hold your questions until the end of the webinar. If the panelists do not have the chance to answer all of them, you will be contacted. This webinar will be recorded and sent to all registrants, plus it will be posted on the AASA website. AASA is pleased to bring you this webinar with Benetech. Benetech is a nonprofit creating software for social good in education for children with disabilities. Their technology transforms learning for students with disabilities and supports educators with retraining and resources. Partnering with over 40,000 schools and districts worldwide, Benetech is driving lasting positive impact on millions of lives. It is my pleasure now to introduce today's moderator and presenter, Benetech's Lisa Waters, Vice President of Programs. Lisa oversees outreach, community, and advocacy work for Benetech. She's an expert on special education policy and law, accessibility, and family and school collaboration, especially as it relates to accessible educational materials. She has a PhD in special education and policy from UC Berkeley and San Francisco State University, as well as an MA in special education from Santa Clara. Take it away, Lisa.
Thanks, Lee. So hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for Access Denied, Digital Access, the right thing, the smart thing, and the required thing to do. As Lee pointed out, I am Lisa Waters. I am the Vice President of Programs, I should say, here at Benetech. We are thrilled to have you with us. Joining me is my colleague, and I'll have him introduce himself as well.
Hello, my name is Michael Johnson. I'm the Vice President of Content here at Benetech.
So if you don't already know us, we are a nonprofit dedicated to advancing digital accessibility standards and services. Your districts most likely have accounts with us with one of our most popular solutions called Bookshare. Today, we're talking to you about some of the other things that we do, and our mission is making sure that no learner is locked out of digital access.
Yes, that's exactly why we're here today, to talk about those items. In today's digital-first classrooms, accessibility isn't just an IT problem or a system problem. It's a district-wide problem. And it defines equity, it states student outcomes, and it carries the very compliance obligations for the district leaders.
So before we dive in and go through this wonderful presentation, we wanted to hear from you. So we're going to start with a quick poll. The question is, who is responsible for digital accessibility in your district today? Is it IT, instructional strategy, compliance, all of the above, or other? And if you put other, please put what that other is in the chat.
So we'll come back to these results, but right away, you can probably see how we're going to touch on these various aspects of the district. So we're going to talk about the right thing, the smart thing, and the required thing to do. So we'll start with the right thing to do. Oh, there's the results. Okay. All of the above is the winner. No, I'm sorry. IT is the winner at 50%. All of the above at 33. Instructional strategy at 17. Okay. So thank you for those results. That'll help us with our presentation. So when we talk about digital accessibility being the right thing to do, at its core, at its heart, accessibility is about equity and about belonging. So you want your digital tools to be accessible so that all the students have an equal opportunity to learn. So if your tools are not accessible, whether it's the content or platforms or anything the district creates or distributes, then basically you're locking the classroom doors and you're preventing the students with print disabilities from being part of the instructional process. They're basically left outside.
So I wanted to tell you a story real quick about one of our long-term acquaintances. Brian, I met Brian when he was in middle school, and his mom used to share stories with us that she had to read him all of his books. She would say that she'd be stirring the pot of sauce for dinner. His grandmother might be reading to him. It really was a family affair. And the school wanted to put him in a special education program, and the parents said, no, our son is very gifted. He really needs to be with his peers and have access to the same materials. And so they found Bookshare. They found Bookshare, and within a short amount of time, Brian was reading independently. The parents no longer had to worry about, um, you know, taking time out of their day to help support his learning. It really fostered his independence. So much so that when Brian graduated high school, he graduated at the top of his class. He then went on to Cornell and graduated at the top of his class from Cornell as well, and now is working for Microsoft. It just goes to show that with opportunity and accessibility, kids can really thrive. And so, think of Brian as we go through this presentation. I'm sure you all know another Brian or another kid like that, but a kid that, just by opening a few of those locked doors, as Michael was saying, really opened up the world.
Thank you, Lisa. I don't know how many times I've heard the story of Brian Miersma, but it strikes me every single time because his life got changed. He was already smart. He just couldn't learn as the other students learned because he had problems processing the data, and setting the technology correctly allowed him to do that.
And I'll tell you, Mike,
that is the
oh, I was just going to just add one more little thing. But as a mom of a child with reading disabilities and print disabilities, it can be very frustrating and it's very exhausting if you don't have the proper resources or have a way to get them the information that they need. So, people like Brian have inspired me not only in my work, but in my personal life as well. And I hope that, his story will do the same for you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing that, Lisa. The reality is, Brian's story and your child's story, Lisa, they're not just two stories of the students in the United States. This happens all the time to way too many students. And we're looking to the superintendents as leaders across the district to make this clear that accessibility is the responsibility of the whole district. And you want to ensure accessibility, not just because of the compliance, right? That's the required thing to do. We'll talk about that later. But it's about giving every student, every single student, an equal chance at learning, as well as being required by state and federal laws. So it really is the smart thing to do. You wouldn't deliberately do anything physical to prevent a student from learning. So why would you do things digital to prevent a student from learning? So when we talk about the smart thing, we're talking about something well beyond compliance. It's a question of strategy and priority across the district.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, Michael, to understand too, oftentimes this kind of falls into the special ed world where people are like, oh, that's a special ed problem. It is and it isn't, right? Because think about something like captions. They are designed to help deaf or hard of hearing students, but they also help English language learners, students in noisy environments, and even teachers reviewing lesson recordings, right? So these captions can actually help many more people that may or may not have a disability be a better version of themselves as well.
Yeah, that's a great example. And captions help me as a traveler when you're looking at the TV in an airport waiting to get on your gate and the TV's on, but you can't hear it over the noise, but you can see the closed captions at the bottom. So not even just an instructional environment, it's in an everyday environment. And then you have things like text to speech tools, right? So that they support struggling readers, as you mentioned, Lisa. And they're also helping comprehension for all students, right? So the payoff is a district-wide, again, strategy and implementation for stronger instruction, most likely to provide improved outcomes, and to reduce both teacher and student frustration when the teacher believes they're presenting the material so the student could get it, and the student wants to learn, but are being prevented from learning effectively because of these digital accessibility issues.
Yeah, and when districts actually bake this in from the beginning, from the start, like they avoid costly retrofits. And we retrofit books all the time for the Bookshare collection and know it takes a long time. Kids are not getting their materials on a timely manner. And there could be lawsuits that are associated with that or other investigations down the line. But by doing it right the first time and by baking in that accessibility from the beginning, it actually saves money. It builds trust with the students and the families and the staff, and it keeps the focus on instruction instead of crisis response, right? Because we have way too much going on in the schools already. Accessible materials should not be one more barrier.
Yeah, that's exactly correct, Lisa. And you mentioned about not retrofitting, but thinking from the beginning. I like to use the metaphor, and you're probably sick of it, Lisa, but I like to use the metaphor of a house, right? It's always easier to draw your plans up properly and build a new house, which has everything that you need in it, just the way you want it, that works for everybody who lives there or anybody who might live there over time, as opposed to getting a house where the stairs are too high or the doorways are too narrow and you have to rip down walls and go through all that. So in an educational environment, you need to draw a line at some point and say, okay, moving forward, we're going to do this. We're not buying products anymore that aren't digitally accessible. We're not going to buy software products that aren't digitally accessible. We're not going to buy content that is not digitally accessible. We're not going to send out at-home communication that isn't digitally accessible. We're not going to live stream graduation without closed captions and image descriptions and things like that. There's so much that you can do. And so the first thing to do when you're talking about doing it the smart way, look, you can't rebuild your district from scratch, either physically or digitally. That's not possible. So the house metaphor admittedly breaks down a little bit, but you can say, starting in the spring or starting this summer or starting back to school or whatever it is you want to do your starting point, and start from there to clean up your messes, to make sure that the next thing you buy, whether it's a piece of grading software, whether it's a student information system, whether it's a middle school math book or an AP chemistry book, whatever it is you're bringing in new to the district should come in clean. And when I say clean, I mean fully digitally accessible. And
Yes.
then you can do the hard work of going backwards and say, okay, well, what do we have? What are we doing now? What can we fix from that point? So you can't always begin from the beginning, like I said, unless you're building a new school. But you can certainly say, as a district leader, you can say, this is an issue across the whole district. And as a reminder, everybody, we're going to talk more about the required thing in a minute. But as a reminder, the regulations for the ADA cover students, staff, including teachers, of course, and the general public. So if you have something on your website, even if it's when is kindergarten registration or what's the football schedule or the lunch calendar or whatever it happens to be, everything you're putting on a computer screen needs to be fully digital accessible. So you want to make sure the content is fully digital accessible. And again, we'll talk more about the legal requirements in a minute, but you also want to make sure the communication pieces, the website that you have, everything that shows up on a computer screen. So
Yeah.
as we shift into the required part, right? So this is the American with Disabilities Act, which has been enforced for 35 years, Lisa, is that right?
1990.
Yeah, 35 years. So it has always covered these things around disability accommodations and adjustments. Primarily it was physically back then because there wasn't a lot of digital content out there. But as digital content and technologies have come forward, the law also incorporates that. And in April of 2024, the Department of Justice, not the Department of Education, the Department of Justice passed a rule which has specific enforcement dates on these already long-standing federal rules. Now, there's a lot of things to consider and understand here. First, what we want to talk about is larger entities. So this is any institution, so in this case, a school district, which serves a population of 50,000 or more. Now you have to be careful here because it's not a student population of 50,000 or more. It's whatever your total catchment area is. So this is everybody who lives in the geography that your school district represents. And you need to be in full compliance with this stuff in April of 2026. So the clock is ticking. It's not even before the school year is out. We're going on then, and then the smaller entities, which is basically everybody else, is April of 2027. And as I said a moment ago, anything on a computer screen doesn't make any difference who the target is, who the reading audience is. If you're posting information about an upcoming bond referendum, that has to be fully digital accessible. If you're posting something about changes to the bus schedule, that has to be fully digital accessible. If it's AP chemistry, content has to be digital accessible. If it's reports that you're sending to your county or to your state, fully digitally accessible. And non-compliance, here we have this gently worded here, Non-compliance may lead to OCR investigations. And I can say more clearly, especially after the webinar we did a little while ago, non-compliance does lead to OCR investigations. OCR is the Office of Civil Rights. The current Department of the Secretary of Education is a big proponent of disability rights issues in education, as is the new nominated head for the Office of Civil Rights. So this is real. This is very real. Now, as one of our lawyer friends said in a different webinar, you actually, if somebody's going to come get you, you want it to be the federal government because they're going to give you long timelines and they're going to give you lots of help, some of that help for free. But a civil lawsuit, if somebody who lives in your district, in your catchment area of your district, they don't have to have a print disability, they don't have to have a student in your school, they just need to live in that area. If they file a civil lawsuit, then you're going to go straight to court. And those become messy and they are very expensive.
Hey, Michael, I want to go back to one thing you said earlier. You talked about the larger districts versus the smaller districts. And I know you said it, but I really just want to put a finer point on it. Large districts are considered those communities serving 50,000 people or more. It's not having 50,000 students, but serving communities of 50,000 people or more. And that's the April 2026 compliance date. Smaller districts, so serving under 50,000 people, have until April 2027, right? And so, as Michael mentioned, these lawsuits are real. You can actually look on what the pending investigations are on the Office of Civil Rights website now. Right now, there's currently over 300 cases that deal with accessibility issues. But as Michael pointed out, we've been told by attorneys outside of the government that civil lawsuits are actually the bigger risk, right? And so one of the things is we want to make sure that you're prepared. We're not here to scare you, and that's why we don't start with the legal thing. We start with smart and right, because we don't want anyone to be in a position where they are not compliant and a student is, or the family is suing the district. So Michael's going to talk to you a little bit about the plan of action, right? So what is your plan of action? What do you need to do next?
Right. And I want to stress Lisa's point about we're here just to inform and advise and help. We list the required part, the legal aspect, third out of three. It's the people that Lisa and I are basically with our life history, but it's also very Benetech mission driven. Doing things because they're the right thing to do, that's our first spot. And we tend to stop there. If it's the right thing to do, we tend to do it. Then you add in it's the smart thing to do, as we've covered. But none of us can ignore, because of financial constraints, political climates, all these other kind of things, you can't ignore the legal aspect. So we're obligated to cover the legal aspect, but we always do put it third out of three, because the first two are, from a mission standpoint, much more important for us. So, we've talked about what does it mean? What does digital accessibility mean, right? So let me give you some examples about how that falls in, and then we can jump into what you can do today. So here's a classic example that we just had a long conversation about with the publisher the other day. So this was a math book, and it was trying to convey certain concepts about charts. So as a bar chart, there was a blue line, a green line, a red line, and a yellow line. And comprehension was dependent on the student being able to tell which of the lines was blue, right? So as you can tell by the value in the blue line, basically is how the wording went. Well, if the student's colorblind, then they don't know which line is blue, right? So if comprehension of a concept you're trying to relay, whether it's this math example I gave you, or something you're trying to send home to students or to the taxpayers or to your county government or whatever it happens to be, if comprehension is dependent on the ability to determine color, and you're not adding in the additional digital metadata, you are failing in your mission to effectively communicate. And again, you're violating the law. So that's just a simple example to think about, right? So what can you do, right? This is the Superintendent's Association. You got a lot going on, all kinds of things happen in your district. I get that. I understand that. I have 7 teachers in my family, so I have some exposure by osmosis of how the education world looks. Lisa was a teacher for years, so she's a little closer to it than I am. So what can you do, right? So from the superintendent's chair or assistant superintendent or wherever your position might be, you can get an audit or an inventory, right? You can build a catalog, a listing of all the digital tools and resources you have. Okay, this is the stuff on our website. These are the most heavily used web pages, the most heavily visited web pages. These are digital documents we send out. Unfortunately, most of these are in PDF, which presents a whole separate problem that we do not have time to cover today, but just write down a note. PDF is a problem. So if you build a catalog, a listing, a spreadsheet, however you want to do that, of all your digital resources, you have a start, right? And then what you want to do is you want to talk to somebody who is expert in this area to analyze those digital assets to see where are you in relation to compliance, right? Another thing you can do, you can embed accessibility in procurement. So I talked about this a little bit before, right? Before you buy the next thing, whatever it is, whether it's a library management system, whether it's what could it be, a early reading program, remediation, a tutoring tool, whatever it is you're buying, before you buy it, put in your procurement contracts that anybody who's selling you anything needs to comply with the regulations. Now, to be clear about what we mean when we say regulations, we're talking about it's the World Wide Web, WCAG, WCAG 2.1 AA. These things are all readily available out there. Benetech can help you with this. A lot of people can help you with this. So they have compliance issues for websites, for books, for documents, for anything basically in your instructional environment. So you want to, before you buy the next thing, before you make this house that isn't livable anymore unlivable, you want to make sure that the next thing that comes in is digitally accessible. You want to set expectations from your chair, right? Across the district. Everything we do. When we onboard a teacher, we talk about digital accessibility. When we buy a thing, we talk about digital accessibility. When we're building teacher training, we talk about digital accessibility. If we're building our own curriculum or we're selecting curriculum, we're going to talk about digital accessibility. So it becomes the way the district thinks, right? This is what we're going to do across the district. You want to build staff capacity. And again, as Lisa said very early on, this is not just a special ed thing, okay? This impacts everybody who goes to school in your district, everybody who works in your district, and everybody who lives in the area that is supported by your district. So it's IT, it's curriculum, it's procurement, it's HR, it's everybody. And you want to make sure as you're doing all this great work that you're building a plan for stability, right? And sustainability. You want to be able to have this continue on. This is not a one and done thing. You're not going to go in and chop down a tree and then you don't have the tree anymore. It's not like that, because you're going to be adding new content. You're going to be adding new technologies. You're going to have a lot of teacher turnover. You're going to have new students coming in, new parents coming in, new people moving into your district. So you really need to make sure that all these changes you're making are sustainable, right?
All right.
And you want to, yeah, go
I
ahead,
was just
Lisa.
going to check. I mean, Michael, that's a lot, right? Like, and I think that, at this point, I don't know if you're sitting on the other side of the camera, going, oh my God, where do we start? I think it's really important just to understand. I mean, Michael laid out really nicely, 5 steps that you could do today. But you don't actually have to do this alone. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to talk to you today, is because there are trusted partners like Benetech and others who can provide you independent assessments. They can provide you guidance, tools, support the work you do. If you rely solely on your internal resources, it can be kind of risky because, as you can hear, there's a lot of components that need to go into being fully compliant for Title II. So, think about who are the resources you can reach out to, who are the people you can bring with you, to go on this journey, because it truly is a systems change. And it will impact the lives of more people than you even realize by adhering to this systems change. So, like I said, we're one of them, but there are others. And Michael, can you talk to us maybe a little bit about what some of those tools might be, just to help everyone on the call feel a little bit more like they have the tools they need?
Yeah, sure. There are a lot of resources out there available for educators in the United States, and many of these things are absolutely free. So that's the good news. You don't have to start from scratch. You're not alone. It's not a mystery. You didn't get a coded message in the mail that you have to work on all by your own. Everything's out there and available to you. Benetech has a ton of resources available on our website, or you could email Lisa and I for more detailed information. The Department of Justice has a whole set of compliance guidelines and fact sheets. So you can go to their website, We'll have some links at the end of the presentation, so they'll be included for your review. There are other organizations, as Lisa mentioned, which have different types of instructions or recommendations, rubrics, getting started kits, things like that. Benetech has a lot of this stuff. So it's not just us. There are a lot of people out there in the federal government and as well as in the print disability space who, because we are mission driven to help with this, make a lot of resources available. Now, there are some things, some of them from Benetech, that you have to pay for. There's also things from Benetech that you don't have to pay for. And there's just a wide area and a wide variety, depending on where you are and your understanding, to catch you up to speed. There are a lot of webinars being given, like this one we're doing here today. So there's just a ton of information by a lot of people who think about this every minute of every day. And that's a big difference I want to draw. Those in the audience don't think about this every minute of every day like Lisa and I do and everybody at Benetech. This is what we do. Digital accessibility is what we do. Digital accessibility standards and services. That defines our organization. You are running a totally different organization of which digital accessibility is an important part, a component piece. So look to organizations like Benetech and others and the Department of Justice and the Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights. There's a lot of free information out there, and there's a lot of fee-based information out there to help you through this. You don't have to do it alone. People are underway already doing some of this work. And Lisa has some thoughts on that, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, we've been doing this for 25 years. So this is not something that, we heard about and jumped into the field here. And providing Bookshare, as we mentioned earlier, is a really great way to make sure the students are receiving accessible materials at the same time as their peers, that they're getting what they need to actually be successful in the classroom, that they're capturing the content and not just, listening to a podcast. And that is an actual example from what my daughter was sent home with recently, right? So, as Michael said, we have tools. We have tools that are designed specifically for districts. We have worked with schools for 25 years, right? This is what we've done. And so, we help with procurement templates. Michael mentioned a lot about, when you're purchasing a new system, making sure that that's accessible. Well, what does that look like? What does that mean? Some states have information about this, but not all. So, we can help you with templates on that. Maturity models. Where are you in the organization at any given time on your accessibility? Professional development offerings. There are definitely opportunities for you to not just have professional development for teachers, but other staff as well, to understand everything from how to make an accessible document all the way to, putting together your team to really make the systems change, as we talked about. We can help you map your starting point, right? And so, by using a lot of these tools, it helps eliminate the places where you're doing really great and helps you focus on the areas where you might need a little bit of help. And so, when I keep saying systems change, it truly is, because then we move from an area from compliance to culture. And so, Michael's talked a lot about compliance. It's not just a requirement. It actually has to be part of your culture and your identity. And, that's really where you're moving from access denied to accessibility for all. It's both a moral commitment to students and a leadership legacy for you as superintendents.
That's great, Lisa. I talked about, you talked about some free resources available from various places. We made just a passing reference to Bookshare kind of on the way into the webinar here. Why don't you spend a minute or two letting the folks know about Bookshare and how it's used in the United States?
Sure. So Bookshare is subsidized by the federal government. We provide access to accessible documentation, the same materials you're using in schools, at the same time as the sighted peers or peers who do not need technology to access their information. When we talk about qualified people for Bookshare, we're really talking about people with visual impairments, those with reading differences like dyslexia, maybe a physical disability, someone who couldn't hold a traditional book or a tablet or a phone. They may need some help accessing that information. And so our collection has over 1.3 million titles in it. They range in everything from early literacy all the way up to, free reading for kids. We want to make sure that we're able to provide enough of a collection, enough of a selection so that kids can read for school, but they can also learn to love to read at home as well. So we have both textbooks as well as, Newbery Award winners, lots of different options for people. And when we talk about digital, it becomes important because many of these qualified users would need a variety of different ways to access the same material. So some people with reading challenges like dyslexia may want to look at a hard copy book or look at the computer and also hear the words at the same time. We call that karaoke style, where you hear the word and you see the word at the same time to help aid in that comprehension so that you can continue reading and not getting stopped every other word, when you're trying to sound it out. All of our content is also available in Braille or Braille ready format. We make everything available in Word, audio only. So you can see we really touch on all the different learning styles, and we use the devices that the kids are already using: Chromebooks, Apple products, Android. We're not trying to introduce new high-tech devices for the kids. We really want to use what they're familiar with and what the teachers are familiar with so that they can jump on and get their books right away. And as I said, oftentimes it comes to Bookshare the same day it hits Amazon or maybe hits Barnes and Noble, which is great because in the past, when people have had to manually retrofit some of these books, it would take 10 to 12 weeks to get the book in the hand of a student. And by then you've already moved on from that unit and the student's behind. And so they start the school year behind. With Bookshare, they can get their books on day one and start with everybody else.
Yeah, so point of clarification on there, Braille is one of the formats that we offer. It's digital Braille. Benetech doesn't do anything physical, so we don't have physical Braille. There's another organization which does that, a few of them actually. So ours is digital Braille, so on a Braille reading device, the students can have there. And then Lisa, one more time, for clarity's sake, the cost for a school district to use Bookshare in the United States of America is currently
It is zero. So
zero.
because we're subsidized by the government, we provide this for free to all US students in schools. Students can use it both at school or at home, or they can use it in whatever way they want. And teachers can also assign books so that they know what their students are reading. We're very flexible in how we let the schools use the collections. But you have to be qualified. And I had mentioned the 3 different qualification categories: visual impairment, reading disability like dyslexia, or physical disability. And one misnomer is that oftentimes people think you need an IEP to access Bookshare. Your state may have different laws, but the federal law that supports this work has said that anybody who meets the criteria of what I had described, whether they have an IEP or a 504 or nothing, has access to this collection. And we serve students, all the way from early childhood to post-secondary and beyond. So if you have a teacher who has a disability who is studying to get their master's, or they're going on to, do some more credentialing work, it would be free for them as well to use.
Yeah, thanks for those details, Lisa. And I wanted you to explain that to our listeners so they had a better understanding. And again, that's a very brief understanding of something that we've been at for decades, done 34 million downloads for readers out of that system. But just to give them a bit of a taste of what it's about, and to stress the fact, when I said Benetech has a lot of free things, the industry has a lot of free things, that's a big free thing because it's 1.34 million titles, as Lisa mentioned, and we add about 90,000 titles a year to that collection. And I'm proud of that organizationally. I'm also proud because my team is the team that does that work. But as an organization, it's a big deal. And again, at the low discount price of free. So, and that becomes one of the things you can do, right? It becomes one of the district-wide things you can do to say, hey, we care about these readers. We care about all these learners. Here's a thing that we're putting in so that anybody who qualifies with a print disability can have access to this content, and we can remove that barrier. We can go back to the earlier metaphor. We will unlock the door and let them come into learning and reading. So that's something you can do. It's a pretty simple process, and your district can start that as soon as you fill out the forms and stuff here at Benetech. And it demonstrates to your district how important these kind of things are, and that some of these things are relatively straightforward and easy to do.
Hey,
It's
Michael.
not going to solve. Yes.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, it might make sense for this group to hear a little bit about some of the work that we've recently done with our pilots. So maybe talk about just some of the
Sure.
different schools we worked with, and then what they responded after they finished going through the process.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. So Benetech, because of the ruling, in 2024, Benetech's developed a thing called BASE, which is Benetech Accessibility Services for Education. So this is a suite of services that we offer, unfortunately not for free, but that we offer to school districts, and we help them on their journey. A lot of the things that Lisa talked about, a lot of the things that are on this slide we're looking at right now, what can you do today? So Benetech come in and we can do a digital assessment for you. We will look at your most commonly used web content, and we will look at your most commonly distributed documents, and we will score them against those rules and regulations I was telling you about. We will give you an operational and an actionable report. So you will know, okay, on our website, we need to make these kind of changes, or when we're sending things home to parents, or we're sending things wherever it is we're sending things, we need to make sure that we deliver documents in this fashion, and we need to take these various things like color blindness into consideration. So that's the digital assessment. We have a thing called the maturity model, something that we developed in conjunction with directly with the World Wide Web Consortia. And this is one where we walk across, Lisa mentioned it a little bit earlier, where we walk across the whole district and we say, hey, what are some of your hiring policies? What are your onboarding policies? What are your procurement policies? What are your instructional technology policies? So we go across the whole district, and we work in conjunction with whoever you assign the task within the district to say, okay, well, here's where we are. All right, we're pretty good over here. We need some work in IT. Boy, didn't even think about adding that into professional development for teacher training and things like that. We have a lot of teacher turnover. Maybe we have a welcome packet, which includes some information about that. 80+% of the students that Bookshare serves are in general education, not in special education. So this issue is much bigger than most folks think it is. There are more people in the world who have dyslexia than are left-handed. So there's a lot of people out there who qualify for this service. So we have BASE. We did 4 pilots over the spring and summer. We had 2 school districts. We had a community college, and we had a small private university. And what we did there is we took those 2 services I described, plus professional development, where we help the district or whatever the educational institution is, up their game, so to speak, so they have a deeper understanding, a broader understanding of what these issues are and how they can go about addressing them. So we had the 4 pilots, like I said, they were very successful. 2 school districts, both of them in Wisconsin, and then a community college in North Carolina and a small university in Indiana. And we learned that as hard as people are working, nobody was really close to being in compliance. A lot of good work, a lot of good progress, but a lot of way to go. So going through BASE, going through and doing the digital assessments, going through and doing the maturity model. Some of them are still finishing up their professional development. They were able to raise their ability, their awareness, the depth and breadth across the district, as well as training of the critical staff to move that thing forward. So we were very excited about that. The pilots worked so hard to help us. And we're moving into the early adopter phase now, where we will have to, the funding ran out on the subsidized piece. So we're moving into early adopters where we'll be charging, but at a discounted rate available now. And you can send an email to me or to Lisa to get more information about that. So it was a learning experience for all concerned. So it was one of those things that really was, it's an overused expression, but I think in this case it's true. It was win-win-win, right? Benetech learned a lot about how we could present this to your average citizen, your average educator who doesn't think about accessibility all day, every day like we do. So we sharpened up, changed some of our language so it was more easily understood by our education audience. The educational institutions themselves were able to make great strides, double-digit increases in their abilities to be fully digital accessible. And of course, the students of all 4 of those institutions are going to be a lot better off. So it really was a win-win-win. So it's called BASE, B-A-S-E, Benetech Accessibility Services for Education. And as I said, we are moving into early adopter right now, and we'll go into general release in the first of the year.
So this is probably a good time to do some Q&A. I haven't seen anything come in through the chat, so I have a question or 2 I might ask you, Michael, and then if anyone else has questions, this is a great time to put it into the chat. But Michael, how can districts balance the cost of digital accessibility improvements with other pressing budget priorities? So especially with tight compliance timelines, we've got less than a year before the large districts need to be up and running. We've got about 6 months.
Yeah, that's a great question, Lisa. And we didn't tell the audience this, but my background before I came to Benetech was all commercial. So everything I did was in service to education, but is always in products or services selling to education before I came to work to Benetech. So I really understand the complexities of funding in a school environment. I live in Wisconsin, where the funding schools are even allowed to raise is even capped by the government. So it's super complicated to come up with the funding to do this. It's an uncomfortable thing to say, but the reality is what you're talking about here, when it comes down to just dollars and cents, I only have this much money, what can I spend it on? Some of this falls into that third category, the compliance category, and it's risk mitigation. So do I spend some money to get better on this? Nobody's expecting anybody to be fully digitally accessible. I think that would be outlandish. If a district was doing a very good job, but wasn't fully compliant, if anybody tried to bring, this is not legal advice, but if anybody tried to bring a suit against them, they could easily explain, look, these are the steps we're already taking. This is what our plan looks like, and probably be okay. So it's risk mitigation, because the worst thing we've learned from speaking with several lawyers about this, the worst thing is to say, I don't have time, or I don't have money, or I don't have the staff to do this. Because what they hear from a legal perspective is, I don't care. Now, that's probably not true. I hope that's not true. But if you say, I don't have time, I don't have money, I don't have the resources, what they will hear is, I don't care. And so that's not a good thing. So the best way to look at this, if you can't find the money or the space in your budget, or you can't get the Lions Club or somebody to help sponsor some of this work, then you have to look at what's my legal risk versus the investment I could make. An investment of, say, $20,000 or $30,000, just approximating, would go a long way towards mitigating a risk in the 6 or 7 digits. So that's the best way to do the balancing. And the other part about the balancing is get started. Look, if you only take one piece of advice away from me in my part of this presentation, is get started. Start doing something. Start doing some of the things we put on the list. Talk to other school districts that are doing it. Look at the resources we talked about. Just get started. And the best way to solve this is to stop making new mistakes. So immediately stop buying things that aren't accessible, and then work backwards. So that's the best balancing act I can give you. But I want to be clear. I really understand the complexities of balancing all these budgetary requirements in this current funding environment.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I think another thing, and specifically because of the group that we're speaking to today, I think it's really important for district leadership and superintendents to understand the role that they should play in ensuring that accessibility happens. So, like, how do they hold vendors accountable? How do they hold staff and schools accountable for, this work that needs to be done in order to be compliant?
Yeah, that's a great point, Lisa. And some of this depends on, well, how do you hold them accountable? That's a question that becomes a cultural thing. If the decision comes from the central district office that says, hey, accessibility needs to be part of everything we do, then you're setting a tone. And if you're able to put some professional development dollars behind that, if you're able to get some free services or buy some fee-based services to show movement. The important thing in all this type of change, and Lisa used the phrase system change, and I think that's apropos here, is to begin, right? I just keep saying, do something, get started, right? That's how it happens. It's not like you're going to finish this webinar and then show up at your desk tomorrow and push a button and you're fully digitally accessible. That's not how it works. So get started and keep going is the best way to do it.
So, Michael, we got a question from the chat, thank you, Lauren, for your question. It says much of this has been about materials within the classroom. Can you expand on what the district needs to do to reach these deadlines with materials that are distributed to the community and to families via the district website and other communication platforms?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that falls right into, so the guidelines are out there, WCAG 2.1 AA, WCAG 2.1 AA. Benetech has that tool I mentioned earlier where we go through and we'll do a digital assessment. So if you came to us and said, these are our top 20 or 30 most visited websites, would you look at those, please? These are the 10 most critical or most commonly distributed digital documents. Would you look at those, please? Sure. Yeah, absolutely. We can do that. We have heard some pretty interesting stories. And as I always say to Lisa, who has a PhD in education, is they didn't cover this in teacher school. So we're talking to people and they're like, hey, yeah, we're all good with the digital accessibility. Everything's in PDF. Ooh, bad. Nope, that's not going to cut it because PDF is inherently inaccessible. Or we actually had somebody say to us, oh, we're all good on this accessibility thing. We're sending all of our at-home communication home in multiple languages now. Super. Glad you're doing that. That's really good that you're doing that. That's not at all what we're talking about, but it's good that you're doing that. So having an outside entity, whoever that entity is, look at it, run these against the assessments. Again, you don't want to try and do all this work internally because it would be incredibly rare that a school district in the United States had the appropriate expertise internally to do all this assessing. So that's probably the best way, is to find somebody, could be us, could be others, find somebody to do an independent third-party assessment of that content, of the district website, of your distributed materials. So anything the district controls or creates should be probably your first point of contact, because while if you bought a library management system that isn't accessible, that's a problem too, but at least you can lean back on whoever you bought that system from, and you can put that language in, at least described in your procurement process for the next time you renew that. But if you created a document that's not accessible, well, that's an own goal, as they say. You did that yourself. So that's the best place to start.
I wanted to add a few more things too. You talked about having a plan and making sure that everything you put in or all the new systems you purchase, are accessible. We actually have seen companies, or actually companies have also come to us too. They're getting scared because people are pushing back and saying, hey, we need to make sure that before we buy this program or before we install this piece of software, that it meets the accessibility standards. And the companies are having to go back and make those changes because they know that schools are not going to select them if they are not accessible. And so you asked about, what do you need to do? I think actually the very first thing is we need to make sure that people actually know what this Title II thing is all about. There's many people we talk to who are like, oh, I haven't heard of that, or that doesn't apply to me. And I think that that's going to be problematic, right? I think, we talked about some of the implications if districts aren't compliant. But everyone on the staff, everyone in the district needs to know what this is and why it's important. And that will help also prioritize it. So that's not just for materials in the classroom, but as people are, as people are thinking about, oh, I'm going to hand out this flyer to take home to the parents. It may not be accessible to all the parents, right? So do you also offer it online? Are images described? Are there things, we talked about different languages, but, we just really need to open up the opportunities for accessibility for the different modes of which or how people might be accessing the information. So I mentioned images being described. That's really important for people who have visual impairments, because oftentimes, whether it's a book or whether it's a website, their screen reader will just read image, and they'll miss out on a lot of really good content that they needed to know, or information that they needed to know for whatever it is that's being told. So there's a few different places to start, but I would say the very first place is just to make sure people actually understand why this is important, and then start making decisions of how you can go about getting you to where you eventually want to be.
Yeah, I think you're right, Lisa. No, I'm sure you're right, actually. Across the district, from a priority standpoint, from a leadership and direction standpoint, that's a message which needs to be sent to everyone who works in the district. And there's another piece too, which is the best way to begin to solve this problem is stop making it worse. So stop creating new things that are not accessible. Stop buying new products that are not accessible. So you can use whatever metaphor you want, but I think the simplest language thing is the best way to solve the problem is to stop making it worse. So that should be your first action. Stop making it worse. Then look at what you're doing and make those processes better. But you talked about various tools, Lisa. So Benetech also has a service, as do other organizations, where we look at the educational technology tools. This one's called Benetech Approved Educational EdTech Tool, right? So we will go and talk to the vendor and help the vendor comply. This was not part of our original plan as an organization, but so many in the vendor community got so afraid, to use Lisa's word, scared, I think she said, of this federal legislation. And then you get states like Maryland and Missouri and Colorado and Oregon and some stuff in California and Texas. So I don't know where the audience is, but that doesn't matter. I just gave you a few states. the point is those laws are typically more restrictive than the federal law. And so there's a lot going on here. And just like nobody would come to Benetech and say, help me run a school district, I don't think the school district folks should say, I can run this accessibility thing, because we each have different talents and different aspects of it. This is all we think about every minute of every day. So we have built a lot of different things of varying price levels, including free, to help you on your journey.
And Michael, you've also done a number of presentations to publishers as well. And they're a little scared too, right? They know that districts will stop purchasing them if they're not providing accessible materials. So, you know, pushing back and saying it needs to be accessible will not be a foreign concept for many of the publishers or tools that are out there. They're hearing about this and they're expecting it. Michael mentioned a few different states. Maryland has some really strong laws that require everything to be accessible. And if it's not accessible, they have to explain why they're still using it if it's not. So, I think this is something that we're hoping will make a big change, not just in the schools and the districts, but in the educational sphere in general. And one other thing is, just because I keep looking at your comment, Lauren, about, on your district website, let's say you put a basketball game on the internet. If somebody needs to access it, but they're blind or have a visual impairment and it's not described, they can't access it. So, you really want to think about, have you met the requirements for people who require captions? Have you met the requirements for people who require descriptions? There's a lot of these little things. Michael mentioned a few different places to go look to get the guidelines. But I'm sure, Michael, we could probably send out some information on, where to find some of that as well.
Sure. Yeah. The email schema at Benetech is very simple. So Lisa's email is lisaw@benetech.org. Mine is Michael, and there they are. Magically, they appear. See how I did that? Or you can, scan the QR code, visit the website, whatever you want to do. We want to make sure that people have awareness of the situation, that people understand when the timelines are coming, and that people understand it's not a special ed thing. It's not just a classroom content thing. It's everything that appears on a computing device.
Yeah, so Michael, I'm going to wrap us up because we are getting a little close to time. So
okay.
I just want to revisit our framing a little bit. We talked about a lot today. Accessibility, as Michael said, is the right thing to do, right? That's where we start. We start with why it's the right thing, because this really touches on equity and belonging for every student, not just kids who are in special ed, but every student could benefit from accessibility. It's a smart thing to do. We get better outcomes and more efficient uses of our resources. So, who doesn't want better outcomes, especially for the kids? And then, as we mentioned last, it is the required thing to do. So the Title II deadlines are coming really fast. The fact that you're here is a great sign. You're already ahead of many people who aren't here or who aren't going to view this at a later time. By just understanding the need for making change, you're already on your first steps getting towards accessibility. So, Michael, I think we had one more poll, right?
Yes, we do. You get to do one, so I get to do one. That's the way polls
Yeah.
work. So we are going to close with just one more poll. So, all right, we're wrapping up here. The session's almost over. Which one of these things feels like the most important driver or motivator for your district to prioritize digital accessibility?
Is it the right thing, the smart thing, or the required thing? And while we wait for those results, oh, here they are. Okay, so we resonated the most with the right and the required. Interesting. Very interesting.
All right.
I think it is a balance of both, right? I mean, I think we got into this field, and I will say we, because as Michael mentioned, I'm a former educator. We got into this field because we care about people. We care about education. We care about learning, right? So that doesn't surprise me that that is up there. And the legal thing does make sense. So yeah, but with, no matter which one resonates with you the most, the path forward is exactly the same. You need to start now. You need to lead from the top, and you actually have to build accessibility into the DNA of your district.
Yeah, and as my closing thought, I just want everybody to remember that our purpose, my purpose personally, Lisa's purpose personally, our purposes professionally, Benetech's organizational purpose We exist to help organizations like yours address these issues. And we beseech you just to simply let us help you. So reach out, ask questions, go to the website, whatever communication method strikes you as comfortable, just do it and keep taking steps forward and stop doing things wrong.
We want to thank everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate you being here. And as Michael had mentioned many times, do not hesitate to reach out to us. We're happy to get on a phone with you, answer emails, whatever works for you. But we really do want to make sure that you're prepared for the deadlines that are approaching in April. We look forward to working with you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.